Welcome to part 15 of the Advanced Revit course. This is the final lesson in the advanced course, and we're dedicating this one to details and how to create intelligent details that read the model. If you'd like to get access to all of the course files, materials, and resources, as well as 20 hours of ad-free content, you can feel free to check out the full course on my website. I'll see you there. There are a few different ways you can create details inside of Revit. First of all, you can model everything and then notate the model. Secondly, you can use the model as a starting place and then take drafting views from that and start to annotate and stylize up those drawings as well. Or you can do what some practices do and use some standard details that they've done in AutoCAD or they've got in a master Revit file, and then they'll take that and bring it into their project. The reason for doing these details is because it's pretty unreasonable to think that you would have to model every little thing that would go inside a project. For example, you aren't going to model in all of the flashings and all of the fixings. Say if there's a timber stud going into another timber stud, you're not going to show a fixing or a fastener, a bolt going from one stud to the other inside the model. If you got 180 bricks on a wall, you're not going to model all 180 of those bricks. It just doesn't make sense. So this necessitates a 2D component for your construction drawings or your documentation drawings. I see a lot of detailing tutorials not talking about one of the most important things, which is utilizing the information inside the model. And I'll get to that in a second, what I mean by that. But we're going to be looking at an intelligent way of adding details and the best practice for doing details inside of Revit. So what I mean by intelligent detailing inside of Revit is this. Here we've got two different detail views of the exact same thing. Now there's only some slight differences in between the two, whereas for the most part they are exactly the same. They're to the same scale, they've got the same graphic settings, they've got all of the same components. It's the same part of the model, just drafted differently or detailed differently. On the left side, what we've done is gone into the Annotate tab and we've used detail lines and filled and masked regions to draw in all of the different components, whether it be the studs that have been drawn in as line or detail lines with masking regions behind them, and things like these battens here. These are just little lines that have been drawn in with a detail mask behind it as well. And then what we've also done is added text notes using the generic text tool to add in the different text notes to these elements. We've then manually added leaders that have pointed towards where those objects are. Now this left side looks exactly the same as what we've got on the right side, apart from a couple minor details. Now what we're doing on this right side is something that is very similar, which is giving us the same result, but the process is a lot different. What we've done here is use detail components, and I'll touch on what they are soon and we'll get into what they are. But as you can see, as I select this timber element here, what it's doing is highlighting its tag as well. And you can see that that is a parameter, or in fact a keynote, which is what we looked at previously in this course. So each element has actually been assigned a detail component, which are then able to be tagged. So for the most part, this left side is what a majority of architecture practices use to do their detailing. They'll just quickly use detail lines and filled regions to put in their details. Now, why might this be a bad thing? The issue with this is that it's not using BIM's information part of the model. As you would know, in Revit, it's a BIM program, so it's using building, information, and modeling. What this means is that the project or the model that we're working on has information embedded within it. And you've learned that with the keynotes and things like that we've been using. What we're doing with this generic text and these generic detail lines is saying, well, we don't need any of that smart, intelligent information. All we're going to do is just put these things in and hope that this never changes. What it's doing is saying that we don't want to standardize a way of adding in, say, these timber packers or these little studs. What it's saying is that every time we want to model one of these things, we're going to have to draw them in manually. And if you're only doing one detail, that might be okay. But what happens when you get 2 or 3 or 4 of these details? Well, that means you're repeating that same process of creating these detail lines, and it can be a time-intensive process. Now, that's not really the biggest issue with it. What I think is the biggest issue is some of these text notes and the information that's being put into this drawing. This information is only based on this drawing. You aren't assigning this element to have this information within it. So this information is not embedded within that element. We know that. It's just a generic text with a leader pointing on that item. You can see that that leader can be moved wherever I want. So this brings up some issues when, let's say, we move this detail. What happens if we start moving stuff around and the leaders get left behind? Let's say that we were to move this timber piece back and this ended up getting put over here for some reason. Well, now the leader isn't assigned to that same element. We're not going to know if this 240 by 45 beam note is actually for this element here. The other thing is, well, we've got this brick, this 230 by 110 by 76 brick in racing red. Now, every time we want to note this item on a drawing, we're going to have to type in this same specification, the same type of brick. So then what happens if that brick ends up changing down the road? What if we change this to a 200 by 100 by 90 brick in Ferrari yellow or something like that? Well, then we're going to have to go through every single drawing where we've specified this brick and change it. Not only is this time intensive, we have to do the process multiple times, but it also opens up room for error and mistakes. And that's really what you don't want when you're doing architectural drawings. You can't have one drawing say that it's in racing red and then another drawing say it's in Ferrari yellow, because then the builder gets on site and thinks, what the hell am I supposed to do? And it's going to cost you a lot of money and time to try and fix this error. Okay, so we know that this method sucks. It takes a lot of time, there's room for error, and it's just a very unneat way of working within Revit. It's not really using Revit to the full of its capacity. So what's the alternative? We want to be able to tag each and every single one of these elements with a value. And as we saw earlier in this course, Keynotes allows us to tag things. However, these drafting elements, as you'll see, if I look at this one here, if I go to the Annotate tab and I try to put an element Keynote on that item, it's not going to let us, because you can't assign drafting elements such as detail lines and filled regions with Keynotes. So what can we do? Let's move over to this other drawing. This is pretty well the exact same view. It looks the same, but it acts a little bit differently, and it's got a lot more information embedded within it. So let's have a look at this same 240 by 45 beam. You're going to see that this is now a detail item. What you'll see is that if we select that, it's also selecting its keynote. So this item has been tagged with a keynote, and that keynote is, let's have a look. If we select that keynote and we change this to a number, you'll see that that is the keynote which it's referencing. And I can change between these two by changing the family type. Detail components can be found in the Annotate tab just over from where the filled regions and the detail lines are. You can see here we've got detail components. If you look at this, it says it adds a view specific detail component to a view. And it also says you can add keynotes to detail components, which is perfect. Detail components can be placed in drafting views and detail views. They won't show up in the actual model. They will only show up in 2D views. They offer a much faster method of detailing than using detail lines and components, because as you can see, this is one element and it's just been dropped and placed in this view. These detail components are line based, so they're essentially using these two elements inside of a family, and they're using detail lines and filled regions to create something that is a 2D family. When you place them on a view like this, they will only show up on this view that they've been placed on. I'm going to show you how this all works by actually creating and recreating this detail. So what I'm going to do is, let's just get out of these two details. We're going to find a section. So what I've done is just gone ahead and opened up the old project so that it doesn't have any of that new information in it. And I've just opened up section 3, which is this section here. It looks pretty horrendous, but what we're going to do is grab that same detail from this eaves here. What you can do is go to the View tab where it says Create and find this rectangle callout. You can also sketch a callout area, but we're just going to use the rectangle tool for now. I'm just going to drag this out over that same area. We want about everything there, but we can change that later. Now to go to this view, you can either click on that callout, right click and go to View, or simpler, because I hate right clicking, you can just double click on this 3 dots here, which is actually the view. You can double click that without the callout selected, and it will take you to that view. So yours probably won't look black like this, but if it does, the reason for that is because of the phasing. You can see that the phase is set for new construction, whereas all of this stuff is created in existing. So we're just going to change the phase to existing, and that should show it up like yours would look like. And usually the first thing I like to do is just hide away anything in the view that shouldn't be there, and that would be the planting. But what I'm going to do is double click V to bring up the visibility and graphics override settings, and I'll just find where planting is, uncheck that, apply it, so it hides away. This section here, you wouldn't see that, so I'm just going to delete that. Already this looks pretty good because it is simplified, it's not showing heaps of stuff. But what we want to do is change the scale and the detail level. The scale we can make 1 to 20, I think that looks pretty good. And then the detail level, we're going to want to change this to either medium or fine. The only real difference between the two is that fine is showing a little bit more detail in the model. As you can see, if I go to medium, it's going to show us all of that wall structure. It would show us the roof structure and everything like that. Whereas if we put this to medium, from medium to fine, it's not going to show anything extra in this drawing, but usually that would show things like door sections and like the jam sections of doors, the actual profile of, say, like an aluminium window or something like that. But if we just put that to fine, that's going to show all the detail that's available to us, which is what we want. Now from here, what I like to do is actually change the lines of these levels and grids. As you can see at the moment, they are a dark black color, and they can be kind of a bit overwhelming in the drawings once it starts to get a bit more crowded as well. So what I usually like to do is actually edit the type of, say, this grid. I like to change the segment color to something like a medium gray, and I'll just apply that, and you'll see it update in a second. You can see it's now a lot lighter, and so it's not as dominant in the drawing. And I'll do the same thing for the levels. You can change the color under graphics and change that to a medium gray, apply that, and you'll see that just lightens up those lines, which is good. What I'm going to do is just bring in this view line so that we don't see that door down there. And I'll just bring in these lines here so we can just see what we need to see. I'll then usually just move out the levels and the grids and make sure that they're all just kind of in the right spot. I think that should be fine for now. They're just out the way, which is good. I'm just going to turn off the annotation crop and the crop region visibility so that we can just see the detail. And then the next thing I want to do is make sure that we get some of this wall structure and roof structure right. So the wall structure is currently showing us a 230 brick veneer, which is plasterboard lined. Let's have a look at this structure and see if we got this right, which I don't think we did. I think we just put in something pretty standardized, pretty arbitrary in the first course. So you can see that the brick is 110 mil in thickness on that external leaf, that external side, which is good. That's how thick a brick should be. It's then showing a 90 millimeter timber stud, which is good, but we should have an air gap between the brick and the timber stud. So what I'm going to do is just select that timber stud and insert a new layer. We're going to make this a thermal/air layer. We're going to change the thickness to 20 mils. So we've got a 20 mil air gap. I'm then going to change this gypsum wallboard to 10 millimeters because you don't usually have 30 mil thick plasterboard. Going to change that to a finish layer as well. We can make that finish 1, and that can stay as structure. That's fine, even though it's not structural, but that's all right. So we've now got a 20 mil air gap. We've got a 10 mil plasterboard. If we apply this, it should look much better. There we go. And that's going to update what this looks like in this detail. So this is where it's really important, as I was mentioning in the first beginner's course, modeling up all this stuff to the correct information is really going to save you time and help you in the long run. And whereas you will come back to most of this stuff when you are detailing, it's always important just to try and get it right first try when you're doing the wall structures and when you're creating walls, because if this were to, say, gain 20 mils because we forgot to put in that air gap, but we added it later, then this wall would get 20 mils thicker, and then it can shift stuff in the model. So you want to get that right at the start. Now for this roof structure, this is going to be a bit more tricky because we don't actually know what the roof structure is, but we can just put something in. What we're going to do is say we've got a 16 millimeter corrugated sheeting on top of, let's say, 45mm battens. So I'm going to edit the type of this roof. You can see that we've named this generic 400 mils when it's actually 250 mils. So I'm just going to quickly change that so that there's no false information in the model. Then I'm going to edit the structure of this. What we can do is insert a new layer, and we'll put this on top of the structural layer. And we can call this 16 mils thick. This will be our corrugated sheeting. We can give that material later. Going to insert then another one below that, which is 45 mils thick for the timber battens, which it's going to sit on. We can click OK. And we're also going to see that this has brought up the overall thickness, but we want to keep that at 250 mils. So I'm just going to do some quick maths here. If we say this is 311 and we want to minus 250, that's 61 mils. So if we go 250 minus 61, it should give us 189. There we go. We'll make this 189 mils thick to keep that overall 250 thickness. And that won't be the case in real life. You'd probably have a certain thickness rafter, but we don't have engineering for this, so that should be fine. And you can see that puts in those lines for that roof, which is going to show up all over the model now. So rather than drawing in detail lines for these certain elements, this is the better way to do it because it's going to change depending on the model. You really don't want to use any detail lines or filled regions because it can really start to mess things up in the model, especially when things change. So what we want to do is try and do all of our detailing with actual model elements. For example, we're going to have to put a soffit under here. Rather than just drawing a masking region and showing a soffit here, I'm going to actually model in that soffit so that it shows up all over the model. There's no false information on our 2D drawings. It's actually stuff that's been modeled, and that's going to show up throughout the entire model, because you don't want the soffit to show, say, here in the detail and then not show in the elevations. That would just look a little bit funny. So then after you've modeled absolutely everything that you can, you're obviously not going to be able to model in everything, which is fine. But then what you're going to do is use detail components. Because they are taggable, it's going to make it a lot easier. It's actually kind of like modeling in 2D, but you're going to use detail components to then finish it up. But let's first just model everything that we can. So let's put in that soffit. I'm actually going to go to a roof plan, and I don't think we've got one. You might not see this because we deleted it before, but let's say that we just delete this. I'm going to go over to view. Oops, my mouse just flew across the screen. We're going to go to view, and under plan views, what we can do is create a floor plan, and we'll create one for that level 2 roof. Click OK, and that will bring up this roof plan. So what we want is a soffit around those external walls going to the edge of this roof. And it's kind of hard to see here because the roof in the way. So what I'm going to do is just change the display mode to be wireframe, so that we can see through that and we can select those walls behind it. If I go to the architecture tab, I can check on where it says roof, but where it's got the drop down, and I can go roof soffit. The soffit is just that little buffer between the roof and the wall, which is just maybe like a 20 mil thick. It can be like a fiber cement sheet. It can be, I don't know, timber. It can be plasterboard if you wanted. It can be really whatever you want. But it's going to be that little thing that finishes off that roof so that you don't see the structure above it. You don't see the eaves overhang. You're just going to see that little flat plane. And that will make sense in a second. So let's just select all of these points. We're just going to go around those external walls. We're just going to select one of each of those external walls. I think it goes something like this. And then we're going to select the external roof as well. This is going to be a bit tricky. This isn't going to be perfect, but obviously if you had a bit more care in your project, you could get this right. And I'm just going to, oops, I selected the wrong one there. This external roof line there, and that external roof line there. I'm just going to use the trim and extend tool by TR. Then I'll just extend all of these lines and make sure that they don't intersect. What have I done here? This line can probably come back here, and then this can trim to that one, that can there. This, yeah, as I said, isn't going to be perfect, but now we've got a soffit at the moment. Just make sure that they're all connected. I'm going to tick that green tick, make sure you save your project. All right, so now let's go back to our section callout, and you're going to see that soffit, except it's currently way too big. So I'm just going to edit the type of that soffit. and I can go ahead and just edit the structure because this is the only soffit we've got. Just gonna make this, say, I don't know, 100 mils thick. We can change that later if we want. And then I'm gonna rename this to generic 100 mils. And let's just okay. There we've got that soffit in there now. But what we're going to want is for it to have, say, a 20 mil, let's just say it's a timber finish or lining underneath that soffit. So I'm going to edit that structure again, insert another layer and put it on the bottom layer, make that 20 mils and then make this top 180 so that we keep it at 100. Now you can see we've got a 20 mil timber lining there at the bottom. So now you can see that we've actually modeled in that soffit. We can tag that element. It's going to show up in schedules and it's a modeled element. So you want to model everything you can first. The next thing you're going to see is that this gutter is way too low and this fascia is currently going over where the roof sheeting is. Now, I'm not saying any of what we're doing at the moment is correct, but we're just going to do this for demonstration's sake. Just going to lower this fascia, say 16 mils offset from that roof. You can see the vertical profile offset. If we make that 16, we need to go the opposite way. We'll make that negative 16. It's now setting 16 mils below, which is below that sheeting, which is good. This gutter needs to come up, let's just say 200 mils. We can probably make that even 220. There we go, that looks good now. I've seen a lot of people, let's say that their gutter was down there and they wanted it to be where it is now. What I've seen a lot of people do is, let's say, hide that element in the view by right-clicking hide in view element and then just drawing it in up there because they didn't want it to move in the model. But Revit doesn't like that. What you want to do is try and get everything as realistic as it should be, as it can be, because as I mentioned earlier, if that gut is showing that it's up here when in the actual sections and elevations it's down here, there's going to be discrepancies and it's going to probably end up in costly disputes on site. So what we need to do is fix up what's going on here. Again, I've seen a lot of people that would hide this soffit and then create a masking region over this so that this line doesn't show. But let me show you a couple of different methods of making this look like how we need it to look. So if I go up to the Modify tab, you're going to see under View, this Line Work tool. And I usually just press LW to bring this up. You can see that this overrides the line style for a selected line in the active view only. So you can choose a different line style for any line in a drafting view, or in fact in a 3D view as well. If I select that, you're going to see that we can then just pick a line style. You can see there's no other options for it, but if you look at the prompt down the bottom, it says click on a line or component to change its style in the current view. And if you didn't know that prompt was down there, well, now you do, because I haven't mentioned that in this course yet. And you're going to see that you can hover over any line in the view and it's going to turn blue. But with our line style as overhead, let's choose that. What if I want to change this line to, say, a dash? If we make this line style overhead, what we can do is just click on that line and it then becomes a dash. Now this line here, what if I want that to be a thin line instead, like with a size of 1? What I can do is just go to thin lines, or if you've got your line set up, then you can choose a thin line. And I'm just going to select that and make that a thin line. So now it's still indicating that this rafter is coming through, whereas the structure of the soffit is also coming through above it as well. So already this is looking a lot better and we haven't even started annotating it yet. So let's actually get ahead and start adding in some detail components. Now I'm going to go up to the Annotate tab, and under Detail, you're going to see Detail Component. If I select that, usually you're going to have this brick joint flushed as the only detail component, or you might not even have any families loaded in yet. What I'm going to do is load in a family, and I'm going to use one of the out-of-the-box Revit detail components, which is going to be a break line. If I go ahead and go to just my normal Revit library, and I'll add this to the course material as well, so you can download this break line and all of the detail components I use for this. I'm going to go ahead and go to Detail Item. If I look under General, you're going to see this break line. What we can do is place this on, say, where we want this view to end. And I actually need to rotate this around 180 degrees. So I'm just going to do that. And it's going to truncate that drawing so that it doesn't show, or it kind of cuts it off at the bottom there. What this is telling us is that that wall does in fact continue down, but we don't need to show all of it. So we can just show it as being cut. I can then create the same thing and I can rotate it after placement if I want. And I'll place it, let's say, where this ceiling is. And I can just rotate it, say 90 degrees, and then move that to place. Now this family is editable, so you can move in some of these lines to make it look a little bit better. If I want to make this more of a zigzag, that works as well. So as you can see, this detail component, it's a 2D element. What we can see is if we edit that family, we can actually look at the structure of this. What you're going to see is a masking region. All this really is a masking region. If you edit the boundary, you'll see that these lines here are detail item lines, so they're just thin lines, and they have points that are editable. So that's good to know that that's the structure of that. It's an actual family, which can be moved and edited within this drawing. Now this detail component that we've just placed, it's only going to show up on this 2D view, only the view that we've placed it from. Going to go ahead and create another one just up the top here. Now, as you saw before, we've also got, if we go back to our detail components, we've also got this out of the box brick joint, and you can see that it's flush. If I just place this over one of the bricks, you'll see that it creates just a view of that brick joint. And what I could do is place a lot of these and it can show every single brick in that drawing. But you know, you don't really want to have to place 20 bricks on each detail view. So if I just undo all of them, what I can actually do is hover over where it says detail component and find repeating detail component. This is going to repeat one of these detail components along a path. So if we have something like this wall type where we've got bricks in a section, we've got a repeating detail, which is a brick. If we edit the type of this, you'll see that it's using that pattern. It's using that family, I should say, that 2D line-based family of that brick joint. And it's going to duplicate this and put it into a pattern. You can see it's got a spacing of 86 mils, which is the height of that brick at a fixed distance. So let's go ahead and place this and you'll see what I mean. As you can see, you can, if I press space to flip this, we can just go ahead and create that brick pattern in this view. There we go. Now what I might want to do is send this to the back so it shows behind that detail item. But now you can see that we've just drawn in every single brick and it's got the little mortar gap there as well for every single brick. And it's just one detail component. Now this is a lot quicker and a lot more intelligent than trying to draw in this shape or this pattern for every single brick, because that would take a long time. You can also do this for things like studs. In this wall, you would have noggings coming on horizontally and studs going all the way up. As at the moment, you can just see the stud, but we'd also have noggings there as well. What I want to do is create a stud pattern or a stud detail component, rather than drawing in, you know, a masking region and then drawing in those items for every single stud. What I'm going to do is go to File, New, Family, and I can find where the metric detail item that's line based is. Going to select that. I'm going to open up this family template. What we can do now is create a family that we can then import into this project. So what I'm going to do is use a masking region, and what I can do is create a rectangle, and I'm just going to lock it onto these reference planes so that it's editable later. Just going to make the height of it 45 mils, and I'm going to make sure to lock that onto that bottom plane there. And at the moment you can see the length is 1200 mils, which is way too big, but that's fine. I'm going to hit the green tick, and then what I'm going to do is go to the Create tab again and create a line. Now I can just draw that X between the middle, which is showing that this timber is being cut through. And what I want to do is just change the length of this to be, say, 90 mils. So I'm just going to select that reference plane to do this and make this 90 mils. You can see we've then got a 90 by 45 stud. And what I actually want to do is give this a thicker boundary. If I go ahead and edit this masking region, you'll see that there is no line styles. We've only got these subcategory styles. If I change them, you can see it's got heavy lines, it's got light lines and medium lines. But what if you don't see any of these? What if you've just got the detail items line? You can't really go to the Manage tab and change line styles. If I select that, it's not actually doing anything. So what I actually have to do is go to the object styles, and here, this is where you'll change those line styles. So what I could do is go to Create New, and I'm going to, let's say if this was a medium line, I can call this medium line, and I know we've got one there, but we'll just do this for this sake. And then we can create our line style from here. And this is going to be exactly the same as that. So I'm just going to delete that one, click yes, and then click OK. Now what I can do is come into here and make this line style that thicker medium line. Okay. Now what we're going to do is load this into the project. And what you'll see is that this family already exists. And that's because what we're loading in is this family called family 1. So we don't want to override that. What we usually want to do is save this out first and give it a name. So I'll just save this family as, I can put it in the materials, and I'm just going to call it stud. Then we'll load it into the project, and you can see that we can actually place this on any drawing we want, and it's actually editable, so it can stretch out as we please, which is actually going to be really handy, as you'll see in a moment. I'm going to go back to our section detail, and now I'm going to press detail component. You'll see that stud shows up. The length of it is a constraint because we put it onto that reference plane, and you're going to see that it's got a length of 90 by default. Let's say I wanted this stud to show up right here in this wall. I'm just going to go ahead and create a 90 mil wide stud. And if I turn on thin lines, I can line this up to that line there so that it shows up in the right spot, then also line it up here. Now I can just move this down and we'll line it up to there and turn thin lines back off. So now we've got this 45 by 90 mil stud. Yes, it took a lot longer to draw that in than just by using a masking region and detail lines. But what we can do now is go to the Annotate tab, and we can actually put a keynote on that element, whereas we wouldn't be able to do that if we just drew that in. So let's say this was a stud. Our key values, these are all just not what you'll see because this is the generic Revit Keynote values. But you're going to see that you can now tag that item, which is awesome. What we could also do is now create this into a repeating detail component. Let's say we wanted it to be spaced every 600 mils down this wall. What I'm going to do is go to where it says component and click repeating detail component. I'm going to edit the type of this one, duplicate it and call it stud, and we can call it 45 by 90. Now we're going to change the pattern or the detail component, and we're going to make this our new stud. You can see that's loaded in there. The spacing we can make 600 at a fixed distance, and we might need to change this rotation, but we'll have a look in a second. Let's click OK, and I'm just going to save this project. And now you can see that we can draw in this new detail component. If I flip that, you can see it's only going to draw 2 because the distance between these 600 mils. So what we've got now is that one component, and it's got multiple detail components in it. The one downside though with doing it this way is that you can't actually tag repeating detail components. As you can see, I'm selecting that and nothing is showing up. This has been something that we've wanted implemented into Revit for a very long time. For some reason, they still haven't put it in along with many other things, but that's just the way she rolls. So we're going to have to use a workaround for that. And what people usually do is they'll just kind of either create a new family that has an array inside of it, which can get a bit complex and we don't really want to do that. Or what we can do is, as we've done here, is place that detail component as a single item over the top of one of these elements. So now we can still tag that first detail component, but it's going to be pointing at that repeating detail component. So for example, if I create another detail component of that brick and I put this over the top of, say, this detail component that's repeating, and I send this to the back so that we don't see it, what I can do is create a keynote, select that brick, and then it's pointing at that repeating detail component. Not the best workaround, but it's all we've really got at the moment. So thanks Revit for that. Now what we're also going to want is to be able to put in this stud or these different timber elements around the rest of the model. So what I can actually do is use this same detail component. We're going to use this stud, and let's say that we want a beam. This is pretty much like a 245 by 45 beam. And this would probably come down to, I don't know, maybe where that roof sheeting can go over the top of it. And it, in fact, would probably come to the bottom. And this, I think we said timber, would then fix onto that beam as well. So that gives that timber on the bottom of that soffit to fix onto something. And then we'd also need something on this side. So I'm going to draw in another, let's say 45 by 80 mil element, and that's just a timber packer there. But as you can see, this is the same detail component that we've got there, but it can be stretched. So it's a lot quicker way of doing some of these timber elements. We would also have 45mm by 45mm timber battens here. So I can again create that detail component and just draw in a 45mm timber batten there, which gives the ceiling, which is this plasterboard underneath, something to fix onto. And this would show up probably at 450mm centers, or maybe 600mm centers, which is off the screen, so we don't really need to show another one of them. So now, what happens if you've got something like this? This plasterboard is currently running all the way up the wall, which, you know, once it reaches the ceiling, it should probably stop about where the ceiling is. It's not going to run all the way up to the roof where no one can see it in this roof space. So what if we want to cut this, just this profile of that plasterboard back to this ceiling joint part? The way we'd do that is by going to the View tab and clicking on Cut Profile. Now, a few of these tools are actually pretty helpful, so I would probably have a look at these yourself and just read what they do. This Show Hidden Lines tool and Remove Hidden Lines tool can bring lines to the front and back and show them in different display modes. It's kind of like the linework tool, but a little bit different. This Cut Profile tool is what we're going to be using though. So as you can see, we can cut a profile out of an element. And what you can do is actually pick a few different elements in the model. But I'm going to click on this plasterboard here. And this is a bit like the split surface tool, which we've been using a bit of, or the split face tool, I should say. So what I'm going to do is just create a cut profile in the middle here. And what that's pretty much saying is, you can see there's an arrow pointing on it. If I go to the thin lines, it might be a bit easier. This arrow is pointing up. So anything above that is going to be shown, whereas anything below it is not. So I actually want to just flip that. Anything below is going to be shown, anything above is not. If I click the green tick, you'll see what I mean by that. Now you can see that that profile is only being cut, or is only being shown up to that cutting point. Anything above it is not showing that plaster anymore. And now we've got a bit of an issue because that wall behind is showing that it's butting up. It's nothing. Whereas in reality, we don't need to show that wall behind it. What I'm going to do is go to the Properties panel and find where we've got file clipping. You can see that the file clip settings are set for the same as the section, the same as the parent view. I'm going to change this to independent. And what I'm going to do is change the file clipping to have a clip without line. Click OK. And we're going to change this file clip offset to something a lot less, like 2000. So now that wall behind it doesn't show up, which is good. Just going to turn thin lines back off so we see what this looks like. There you can see we've got the plasterboard that comes all the way up in line with this, and that looks a lot better because that plasterboard in reality isn't going to run all the way up that wall. The next thing you might want to do is add in some insulation. And so to do that, we're not going to be using detail components, although it is probably a good idea to do so because the way we're going to be doing doesn't give us a taggable element. But it's also a way that is kind of highly flexible and parametric in its annotational way. I'll show you what I mean by that. If we come to the Annotate tab and we go to the Details section, you'll see we've got an Insulation tool. And this places a bat insulation graphic in a detail view. So this is only going to show on the view that we placed it on. It's not a 3D element, but what we can do is specify a width of the insulation. So for a 90mm timber stud wall, we want a 90mm thick insulation bat. We can choose an offset or where it's being placed to. And we're going to keep it at the center. Then you'll also see the insulation bulge to width. I think that's a ratio, yeah. And we'll keep that at 3 for now. What I'm going to do is from the center of this stud, place this insulation all the way down to the bottom. And at the moment, you're going to see it's overlapping that. So we're just going to send that insulation to the back. Already, this is giving us that insulation bat look, which is great. If we change the insulation bulge, you can see that it's going to change that width of that bulge. We can make that 1 to make it really wide. I don't usually touch this. I usually keep this at 3 because it looks pretty good out of the box. We also want insulation, say, in here. And if I place this, you're going to see that it's still 90mm thick. So what I can do is select that and change the width to 45mm and send that to the back. So that's showing that ceiling insulation. We've got that wall insulation. We need some insulation in the roof as well. So I just hit enter to bring up that insulation tool again. Hitting enter just brings up the last tool that you've used. And now I can choose a width. I think we're probably gonna have to go to 189, the thickness of that rafter at the moment. And we're just gonna place this from the center and bring this up. That insulation is only going to go probably in line with this. So I can bring that out just a little bit more, and it's probably gonna look something like that. But what I also wanna do is bring this down in line with that rafter to look like that, and then send it to the back so it doesn't show up in front of any. The reason why it comes to here and not the edge of the roof is because if it's going to the edge of the roof, it's not insulating anything. We only want to insulate this inside space. The next thing I want to do is show the roof sheeting profile. I'm going to use a detail component to do so. So what I'm going to do is load in by going to the Insert tab, Load Family. I'm going to find where we've got this in our project files. I'm going to load in that 16mm corrugated sheeting. Then I can go to the Annotate tab and click on Repeating Detail Component. And we're going to have to make up a new one. If I duplicate this one and call it 16mm corrugated sheeting, call it that, we can change the detail component to be that 16mm corrugated roofing at a fixed distance of 50, because that's what we made this family from. And we made this family the same way that we made the timber stud family. We just created a new detail lined based element. You're going to see this is the wrong way around at the moment. So what I need to do is edit the type again and rotate this 90 degrees. If I select that first point, you're going to see that we've got this we've got this corrugated sheeting profile, which we can follow the line of that roof. And it's going to look actually probably something like this, where it overhangs into the gutter so that the water drips off into the gutter. Now the issue here is that it's showing the corrugations horizontal, whereas it's probably only going to look like this because it's coming down vertically and falling into that gutter. But if that gutter wasn't there and this was going horizontally instead, that's how you would show it. But I'm just going to keep that there for the sake of it. We would then also have these battens that this roof is sitting on. So again, we've got to create a timber stud in here, a timber batten that's 45 mils. But then what we want to do is duplicate this in a repeating detail. So I'm going to use that repeating detail component, duplicate this and call it stud 45 by 45, when in fact that's probably a batten. And we'll create the spacing at 600 mil centers, and we'll choose that stud there. Now, if I draw this in, you're going to see that it's still using that 45 by 90 family. So what I'm actually going to do is undo that, and we're actually going to edit that family. If I come down to the project browser, what I can do is actually search under families by right clicking and going search. I'm going to just look for stud. If we click next, you're going to see that it's going to show up where that stud is in the project browser. I'm just going to edit the family of this. We're going to save this out as a 45 by 45 batten. And then we're going to change this reference plane to be 45 and then load this into the project. Now what we can do is create that repeating detail component and use that detail component, which is the 45 by 45 millimeter batten, and click OK. Now I can draw this in at 600 mil centers, and it's going to show all of those elements. There we go. All right, so now that you've got all of your detail components in, you're happy with how this looks, what you can do is start to annotate it. And we're going to use Keynotes to tag these elements. You can also use type-based tags or family-based tags, but I think because we're using Keynotes for all of the other elements, it makes it easier, and it's a simpler way of tagging than using some of the type-based tags. So I've just created a new Keynote file, which is just a text-based notepad file. And I'm just going to start to label some of these things. So for example, let's say that we want to tag this brick, and we're going to call this, say, cladding 01. I'll hit tab, and then I'll call this something like, I don't know, we can just call it brick in racing red. We'll just call it that for now. And we're going to make sure that we do this in all caps. Now let's say that we also wanted to tag, say, these 45 by 45 battens. We can call this detail item 01. And you might want to, mix some of these up. So we can call this 45 by 45 batten or timber batten. And then detail item 02 might be this 80 by 45 timber packer. And then let's say these studs, we've got DI03, we can call it 90 by 45 timber stud. And we want the same kind of formatting for each one of these. And then even things like this soffit, we can call this, say, SL01 for soffit lining, and we can call this soffit lining 01, maybe like timber soffit lining. What I can do is then save this and then reload it inside of the model. If I click on reload under keynoting and click OK, now what we can do is use the element keynote, and we can say tag this soffit. And what if I bring this out, and we can now select the timber soffit lining, and we can tag it with that. And if we want this to be text-based, what I can do is go down to Keynote text, and I need to select that first and go Keynote text. There we can change that to timber soffit lining. Now let's say we wanted to tag, let's say this timber batten here. What I can do is the same thing, and I'm just going to bring this out and call this the 45, or what is this, the 80 by 45 timber packer. And that's just automatically got to place that in into the model. So as you can see, these detail components then have that information on that element. If I edit the type of this stud, you're going to see that it's actually now got that keynote in its family properties, in its type properties. And so then if I try to keynote one of these other studs or one of these other timber elements, it's going to give us that same keynote. So what we might need to do is, let's say we were to tag this stud. It's not actually an 80 by 45 timber packer. So what I'll need to do is edit the type of this, duplicate it, and we would actually call this like 90 by 45 timber stud, and then would change the keynote here to detail item, whatever it was in our keynote. And that would be DI03. Click OK. It's going to update that in the model. So already this is a much quicker way of tagging things, because now anytime you use this element inside of any of your detail views, all you have to do is just tag the category or tag the item, and then it's going to give us that text. And then if this were to actually change and be a 70 by 45 millimeter stud, all we have to do is edit it in this master keynote file, and it's going to update that information within the model so that we don't have to go through every view and change this to 70 by 45. We just change it in the master keynote file, and it's going to update throughout the rest of the model. Now, what if we wanted to represent one of these things at say a half tone? Rather than right clicking it and going override graphics and view by element and then clicking half tone, applying that and so forth, which you're not going to see because it's behind that element, what I'd prefer to do is use filters so that you're not overriding graphics and view, which is also another way of getting things a bit messy inside your model. What we can use are filters. These filters are project based and will update every single one of these components throughout the entire project, no matter what view it's on, dependent on the values you give it. That might be a bit confusing at the moment, but let me show you what I mean. So if I double press V to bring up the visibility and graphic override settings, and you go over to filters, this is where you can start to play around with this. I'm just going to remove this filter here, so we've got nothing. What I want to do is set it up so that if we go into a family or a detail component, and we leave the comment, or we type the comment into that family, and we say, I don't know, something like beyond, so that it's in the distance. I want it so that that element is then shown in a half tone. If I add a new filter, you're going to see that we're going to be choosing a rule-based filters. So we can just click edit/new. Now we're going to want to create a new filter. So I'm going to click new down the bottom here and call this halftone beyond. And we're going to want to define the rules of this filter. So click OK. Now we get to choose a category of which we want this filter to apply to. And I want this to apply to all detail items. And this is going to be project based. So now we can choose some rules. You can see that there's a few different parameters that we can choose from. And under here, you've got things like Keynote. So we could base this off of the Keynote value, or we could change it from the mark, say if it's a door number or a window number or something. But we want to do this off of comments because these are instance based and we can change them for each element. So now we want it to say if it contains the word beyond, then we're going to be filtering out from these parameters. So all we've done is just created a new filter where if the comments has the word beyond in it, then from here we can do something with that. So you can see we've got halftone beyond. Let's click OK and add this to this project. So now this filter is going to be enabled at the moment, and all of the override settings are exactly the same. But what we can do now is click on halftone, and click apply. I'm just going to get out of this screen, but now what I can do is select, say, this timber packer, and I can type in the comments timber packer beyond. And what this is saying is that it's in the distance. And you're going to see, because we've put that keyword beyond into this comment, that it's going to show in half tone. So this is really, really handy, and it's a good way of changing the settings of elements within a view without, duplicating that family, without having to create a new family that is in a gray color. So this doesn't just work for detail items, this can work for any type of element within your model. And that can be from anything from doors and windows if you wanted them all to be bright green or something like this. It's a very simple way of doing that. So let's say we wanted to highlight this roof and we want it to be a bright pink color, for example. What I can do is double click V again and go into filters and create a new filter. I'm just going to go edit/new and then create a new filter. We're going to call this pink roof. So now what I can do is within this categories checkbox, I can find where roofs are, check that, and then we can again choose any parameter that we want. I'm going to make this comments again and say that if it contains the word pink, that it's going to change all of the roofs in this model or in this view to be pink. Click OK, and now we can add that pink roof filter to this override settings. Now what I'm going to do is change the cut lines of this to be a bright pink. Click OK on that, OK. If I apply this and click OK, you're not going to see any changes happen yet because we haven't added that comment to this roof. And now if I add this comment and I say this roof be pink, you're going to see that that is now highlighted in a pink. And let's say we go back to our section just to see if it's showing up there as well. You can see that it has not updated it in this view because it's a view-based setting. It's like changing any of these override settings. It's only for that particular view. So you're going to then see that this view has no filters, but you can then add one of those previous filters that we've added in from before, and that pink roof filter is there. And we can then change how we want this to look in this view as well. So if we want this to be, say, a bright green now instead, what we can do is apply that, click OK. And because that comment is still based on that roof as pink, it's going to show up as that color. And so I recommend having a play around with filters. It saves you a lot of time, and it's a lot better than overriding graphics in settings and changing all of the settings for all the projection lines and the cut lines and everything, when all you have to do is just say add a comment on it. Otherwise you can base it off of any of the other parameters, say in the roof. You can also base it off Keynote values. So if I click on V and go to filters, and let's create a new filter, we can click on new and we'll call this, I don't know, just Keynotes or something like that. What we can do is select all detail items, and we're going to add the Keynote value to this. Now, if the Keynote value, say, contains DI, meaning it's a detail item, we can click OK and then add that Keynote filter to this view. What you can then see is that we can turn off all of the keynotes containing DI in this view, or we can turn it back on, and then we can say halftone them all. So anything with the keynote assigned to it as DI is going to show as halftone. There's a whole lot of reasons why you'd want to do this, and I just recommend having a play around with it, and it's a good thing to know because it can save you a lot of time and a lot of hassle. So one last thing that I want to add is that even things such as this air gap here, it's been modeled as a detail component with invisible lines. It's just a masking region with invisible lines, just so that I can tag that element with a keynote. Whereas if this was just a random element, I wouldn't be able to tag that. If it was just a wall air gap, I wouldn't be able to tag that. So the other thing is tagging parts of, say, a roof. If you wanted to just tag this rafter rather than the entire roof, what you can do is come up to the Annotate tab and go to Material Keynote. And you can actually tag a material that is part of the structure. So let's say we wanted to tag this timber batten that is running along this way, or the roof sheeting above it. Because it's split up into 3 different materials, we can do so. Or say in here, if we wanted to just tag this material, which is the timber stud, or this air gap, or in fact this brick layer as well, we could do so. So to do that, let's say we wanted to tag this timber batten. I'll just bring this out, and you're going to see that it's not giving us any information on what that is. Where that information is coming from is within the actual material. So if I go to edit the structure of this and I have a look at what that material is, the reason why it's not giving us a value is because it's just showing us by category what that material is. Whereas if we choose, say, a timber material for this roof, if I just look for a timber and we can call this, say, glue laminated timber, what I can do is duplicate this and call this batten. And what I'm going to do is just duplicate the assets so that it doesn't affect that original glue laminated timber material. And then under identity, you can see that you can give the material different information. And one of those parts of information is a keynote. So you can assign a keynote to the material. We'll call this, say, roofing 04, because at the moment we've already got roofing 01, 02, and 03. What I can do is type in roofing 04 and call this a 45 by 45 timber batten. I'm going to save that file, Control S, and then if I click OK, it's then going to assign that material to that object. What I'm going to do is just reload that Keynote file one more time. That will automatically update because we've already assigned it that keynote of RF04. So you can see that we've just tagged that material. And so that's just a material keynote, but that's how you can break up different parts of, say, a roof rather than having to tag the entire roof as, say, existing rafter on 45 timber battens with a roof sheeting. If you'd like to get access to all of the course files, materials, and resources, as well as 20 hours of ad-free content, you can feel free to check out the full course on my website. I'll see you there.